We're going to talk about the role of a school counselor. And to discuss this, I'm really glad that we have with us Jill Cook. She is the executive director of the American School Counselor Association. The abbreviation is ASCA. She also served as a liaison to numerous K through 12 nonprofit and for-profit organizations that work on issues related to the well-being of our nation's students. In addition to holding several other positions, which you can see in her bio in the article that we have on this interview, she was also a music teacher, a middle school counselor, and assistant principal before she joined ASCA, which was in 2001. So Jill, thanks so much for being with us. I'm really glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And, what we want to talk about is the role of the school counselor. So there's some misconceptions in terms of what that means. And I think a lot of people in different roles just need real good clarity in regards to that. So I was wondering if you could help us out with that, like share with us, what is the role of the school counselor and what are some of the misconceptions that people have about it?
I would love to talk about that. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So about 20 years ago, the American School Counselor Association, we call it lovingly ASCA, made the language shift from the words guidance counselor to school counselor. And that's in some places in the country, we know guidance counselor is still used, but by far and away, school counselor is the language used. And the reason was that guidance was definitely more limiting. The old perception of the school counselor often is that they are just there to get students into college at the high school level, or they're just there to work with students who may be in trouble or having issues, and that they're primarily only at the high school level. And so guidance is certainly a function of what school counselors do, but today's school counselors work with all students in a school. We have almost 120,000 school counselors in public schools across the country, and they are kindergarten through 12th grade, and they work with all students in a school on academic development, social and emotional development, and career development, which is really about all post-secondary opportunities. It's not just about higher education, and this career development piece is not just at the high school level. This, again, is a K-12 issue. And school counselors do this work through classroom instruction, through small groups, through individual meetings with students. It might be short-term individual counseling, lots of collaborative work with teachers and administrators and families and community agencies. So really, they are there to ensure that students are ready to be there at the school and able to learn. The other big shift in the profession, and this is what is really different from the time I was a school counselor a very long time ago, is that today's school counselors use school and student data. It's not just random acts of guidance or hugs and hankies that we may have thought about the profession. School counselors are looking at data to identify needs and gaps so they can develop their school counseling program to address those specific issues for their school. And those goals are typically around attendance and academics and behavior and discipline, really getting at what it is that schools are looking at as metrics for student success. So school counseling isn't just ancillary to that work. They're there right in it, looking at data to identify gaps, opportunity gaps, achievement gaps, attainment gaps, resource gaps, information gaps, and to ensure that all students have an equal access to the learning that their school provides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, when people hear the word counselor, they think of psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
So can you speak to that in terms of the school counselor's role in regards to psychotherapy?
Sure. So school counselors are educators. Most of the states require that to be certified as a school counselor by the State Department of Education, that you have a master's degree in school counseling. So school counselors, as I said, may do short-term counseling, but they are not clinicians. They are not therapists. a student that would need more significant interventions or more significant mental health work, they would work with the families to refer the student to an outside person or an outside agency, or an agency that may be coming into the school already to provide mental health supports, but to ensure that that student gets the support they need. And really critical to this work, it's not just school counselors in a school who are part of this effort, it's school psychologists, school social workers, and really school nurses as well.
Yeah, and can you speak to the differences? Like what is the difference of the role of a school counselor versus a school social worker, a school psychologist?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question. And so, as I said, school counselors are going to work with all students in a school. If you're familiar with the multi-tiered systems of support and that triangle with the 3 tiers, school counselors are really doing the majority of their work at the tier 1 level, which is about prevention and early identification. And a lot of that is done through that classroom instruction. School counselors at all levels go into classrooms and teach lessons based on the school counseling program goals and what the school data is showing. And we have student standards that school counselors use to help guide that curricula development. So they're doing a lot, making sure all students have information, access to whatever it is that has been identified. Now, at the tier 2 level, we know there are going to be some students who have more needs. So that might be some of the small group work, the individual counseling, working in collaboration with those other individuals. Our school social workers are just instrumental in helping us connect with those resources to ensure that families have access to resources and services that they need. And the school psychologists often do a lot of work with the special education population and students who have IEPs or individualized education plans. They do some screening and they sit on those IEP meetings, and school counselors may participate as well and may certainly provide supports to those students as well. And nurses, as we sit here still in the middle of a pandemic, we know certainly there are just not enough school nurses. There are not enough of any of these professions, but school nurses are critical as well. And you know, I don't think it would be surprising to you that there is often a big correlation between students who go to the nurse's office with a tummy ache who really aren't sick but have other things going on. So that it's critical for school counselors and the school nurses to talk. That's a way to find out that there may be students who are having issues in school.
Yeah, and so like, you know, parents, the school nurse, other professionals or teachers, or they might think, okay, so a student is having emotional difficulties, right? So
Mhm.
you're struggling emotionally, go see your school counselor. But the school counselor is not going to provide ongoing therapy, but they're going to help assess what's going on, make appropriate referrals, see what other support services are available, see what modifications or resources available in the school. Can you speak to that? Because there might be some confusion about that, you know, where people think, hey, you're having emotional difficulties. Why go see a therapist and you know, pay to see a therapist outside of school time when you can just go see the school counselor
Well,
during school time?
and it may be that going to see the school counselor for a short term, you know, maybe 6 or 7 times might be sufficient. Because school counselors are educators in a school, there are also other opportunities to connect with students. Now, we certainly don't want school counselors doing non-school counseling duties, but the very nature of being in a school, you're at some point going to have bus duty or cafeteria duty or something, or standing out in the hall during class change. But those are great opportunities to check in with students. Maybe that student who was referred to you or who came to you with an issue. Hey, I see Joey coming down the hall, give him a fist bump. How you doing? Just those quick check-ins. Just the very nature of being in a school gives you an opportunity to have different kinds of interactions that is not just a pure clinician. And again, if students need that, if there's serious mental health concerns or issues that need long-term counseling, long-term psychotherapy, that's when those referrals are made. But school counselors for many students talking to the school counselor, knowing they're there when they have an issue is just a great service for a lot of students.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. So when would you say, and someone, another provider or a parent, when should they refer a student to see the school counselor? What would be those instances?
It can be if they have any concerns, if their student comes home and says, hey, I'm somebody was mean to me, somebody bullied me, absolutely let the school counselor know. They're also, one of the things the school counselor would do is work with the school staff and families about warning signs. Has your students' grades gone down? Have they changed peer groups? Are they spending more time alone than they used to? Anything that's troubling to a teacher or to a family member or parent, absolutely reach out to the school counselor, because those often, not always, are indications that there may be something else going on that we need to look into and talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. I personally think of a school counselor as being well equipped to help a student navigate the social environment of the school. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Relationships, peer relationships,
Mhm.
definitely part of that. All educators, appropriate social media
Mhm.
behavior, things like that.
Yeah. And how have school counselors been helping students during COVID-19 with all the additional stresses, having school virtually, maybe not having the resources they need, or not having the supervision at home, or kind of falling between the cracks and not showing up, all those kind of things. How have school counselors been a part of fulfilling that need?
That's a great question. And gosh, my hat is off to all educators over the last year and a half, as we are now entering our third school year with disruption. My hats are off to all of them. But when schools did shut down or did go virtual, that certainly changed what school counselors were doing. And for many, one of the first things they did were to make contact with those students they had concerns about or would have categorized at risk. I know there in some school districts, principals masked up, socially distanced, physically distanced, went to every student's house to physically lay eyes on them. We know one of the big concerns, especially in March, April, May, June of 2020, was that there were so many students that schools never made contact with. If they were doing virtual school, they never logged on. They didn't know if they were okay. One of the things school counselors did, and I know to some degree are still doing so, they added to their signature lines, like where to go for help, crisis hotlines, the community mental health agency, knowing that they may not physically get to see or talk to or hear from every student. But if just having that information in their signature line, if they emailed families or they got an out of office response, there at least is something there. But a lot of school counselors, they did work virtually. There, some very creative things happened. They worked with teachers. They helped pop into classrooms. Often it was just a temperature check. How you doing? Good, bad? What's going on? How you doing? Some school counselors did run groups, and we had lots of conversations around the ethics of offering counseling either individually or in small groups virtually, because there is no guarantee of confidentiality if students were at home. There's no guarantee of who else might be in the room or might be in the home. We know students, not all students were even comfortable turning on a camera. And we just know even the access, about internet access, technology access, was just a whole issue too. So school counselors did provide services. Some, they got creative. They sort of had after school clubs, at least where it was an opportunity for peers to interact even virtually. Some did virtual job shadowing with area businesses at the high school level, or spent time for high school students to be able to go into a local business virtually and just learn more about it. So they were certainly working at finding times to make those connections. One of the things I'd heard anecdotally from high school counselors was that they had more interaction with parents because it was virtual and there was not limitation of travel or distance or time, that they had more interactions with parents than they ever had. And so I know many schools were trying to, as we go back in person, figure out how we can help maintain that connectivity with families.
Right. Yeah. Maybe like given that option, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's easier for people to make. It's interesting. I have 4 kids, and we just had a parent teacher conference for one of my kids, and it was on site.
Mm.
So there were 5 teachers. There was like a 6th teacher, I couldn't be there, and my wife and I. So you had 7 people that all came to the same location, right, at the school for the meeting. And I was curious why it wasn't just offered to just meet virtually.
Mhm.
But yeah, because it was always the question, like, are we both going to go? My wife and I both going to go, or just one of us? Because it was, you have to, takes a long time, right? You have to get there, get back,
Right.
park, go through the sign in, and all that kind of stuff, find the room.
Yep.
And which is, it's nice. It's nice to be on site. It was kind of cool. You get to see the school and stuff, but it was also like, wonder if I don't think they even offered
Mm.
for us to do virtual, which may have been a better fit for
Right.
one or both of us. Yeah. So it's interesting. And then with, one thing I noticed with, in terms of confidentiality and privacy and so forth, school counselors, they have the role of school counselor, but then there's kind of sub roles according to the task at hand, right? In some ways. So like in terms of privacy and confidentiality, I think when you are providing education, the standard for privacy and confidentiality is different than if you're doing a school support group or a school counseling group, right? Where kids are going to be sharing personal stories and working through things emotionally. Seems like there's a different standard for privacy. So when kids are in class virtually and their siblings in the same room in the background, okay.
Mhm.
But when they're talking about something related to counseling, their emotional health and what's going on with them emotionally, having the sibling in the same room causes a problem.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but so kid, we develop these norms like, hey, I come to class and people are in my background. I blur out the background or I turn off my camera. That's okay in this particular instance, but I'm receiving another service from the same school, but the what's okay and what's not is different.
Mhm.
Um, can you speak to how schools have helped students navigate that difference between what's okay and what's not in terms of their environment when receiving services, either a class or a group counseling session?
Well, and it's, as I said earlier, there are no guarantees about who is
Yeah.
listening, regardless, or who
Yeah.
may be in the home or not in the home.
Mhm.
So I know schools and school counselors in districts that did go ahead and do some small group work with students. It had to be with that understanding and knowledge. I know some districts made a decision not to offer that because of the virtual setting and the all the intricacies that
Mhm.
involved. The other issue school counselors wrestled with early on, I didn't hear about it after a few months, was that some school districts, regardless of the interaction educators were having with students, they were requiring those to be recorded. So certainly, as we think about confidentiality from a school counselor's perspective, that ding 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 ding, what do you mean? What do
Yeah.
you do with this? Who will see it? Where will it be stored? Will it ever be deleted?
Right.
All those questions.
Yeah.
So there are lots of the COVID and the March of 2020 brought up a lot of questions that I don't think we've ever had before around some of this.
Yeah, yeah. And even if they're on site in a group counseling meeting, there's no guarantee of
Nope,
confidentiality,
nope.
especially if they have an electronic device, which is very easy to turn on recording. If they have a phone sitting in their pocket, they can with the little push on the side of it turn on the recording of, right.
Mm.
Yeah, the certainly concerns there. Um, yeah. So, and in terms of other providers, parents, primary care physicians, behavioral health providers outside the school system, in terms of communicating with the school counselor, the times it sounds like they would communicate with the school counselor is if they feel like the student's struggling either academically or socially or emotionally, or if there's just a things going on in their life that's really impacting their school performance, any of those things. It kind of sounds like the school counselor looks very holistically
Yes,
at the student,
yes.
and they help them navigate both academically and emotionally. And then they're also kind of a care coordinator in the sense of assess what the needs are and refer. So if they need some social services type things, resources, you have the school social worker. If they need therapy, referring to therapy, they can, coordinate with the teachers when there's academic issues, or to the school psychologist if testing needs to be done. So it sounds like, there's many reasons. It's kind of like a primary care physician in healthcare, right? They're the kind of generalists. They look at holistically, make referrals, and help with the whole picture. Is that a way to look at that?
Yeah, it can be. That is certainly a, a part of what that role is. And then and I think good school counselors, and I am certainly biased, are
Mhm.
absolutely the heart of a school, because they sort of have their finger on the pulse of almost everything that's going on in a school, because
Mhm.
one, they're working with all the kiddos, or their
Mhm.
caseload if they're more than one counselor, and they're in classrooms, they're doing small, but they just have connections with everyone.
Mhm.
So I think that a good school counselor is just invaluable.
Mhm.
So exactly what you mentioned. And I think one of the things that, and it's not that it wasn't important before, but something COVID helped us see is that how much of our work in all areas are often siloed, and that I just having the virtual capacity to talk
Mhm.
with somebody halfway around the world, and you don't have to go there for an in-person meeting. And so I think as we think about all the other individuals outside the school that support
Mhm.
students and families, that communication piece between the school and the school district and those other entities is critical. It can't be about not talking to each other. So
Mhm.
because the risks are too great for students who may have serious needs.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I hope has been reinforced or started are those communication channels and those processes in schools for teachers and families and other students to figure out who it is they go talk to when they have
Mhm.
concerns and needs, and for the other agencies not to be scared of the school. I mean, we're all working for the same purpose. And I love the places that have opportunities for families to access mental health services on site.
Mhm.
I know there are a lot of schools and districts that would love to have the schools really be the hub of all the services that
Mhm.
students and families receive,
Mhm.
because they're just often the heart of the neighborhood and heart of the community.
Right.
So us communicating with each other is critical.
Yeah. And, I liked how you brought up the, looking at metrics, data, because as a behavioral health clinician working with a teen or a child, it's hard to know exactly what's really going on in their life. How are they actually coping with life and academics and social and so forth? because the child will tell you one thing, but the
Mhm.
reality could be very different.
Absolutely.
So if you're listening out there and you're listening to this and you're a parent, you know this, right? So your kid comes home, how's school going? You got your schoolwork done? Yeah, going great, doing
Mhm.
fine. How are you doing socially? Oh, great. I have a lot of friends. But then you might find out from the school, like they're not handing things in, their grades are really suffering, or they're sitting alone, they're not interacting, or whatever it is. So as a behavioral health clinician, communicating with the school counselor seems like a way to get that information of how are they actually doing. Are they improving? Has things gotten better, or are they really struggling? Do
Mhm.
people utilize that, or what do you think about that?
Well, it depends on what, if the parents give the consent and
Yeah.
sign waivers for the organizations to actually, and then the
Mhm.
individuals to talk to each other. So a lot of it's
Yeah.
contingent on that.
Right.
But I'd like to think that ultimately everybody being on the same page would be for the good of the kiddo.
Yeah. 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 Having those consents signed, and I could see that communication being really helpful. All of a sudden they had the school counselor might know that they had a huge shift, like they're hanging out with a totally different group
Mhm.
that's concerned or whatever. Yeah, that the therapist might not even know, because sometimes kids are made to go to counseling, don't really want to be there and don't really want to
Right.
share, be transparent. Yeah, well, this was very helpful. Definitely helps get the clarity of what the school counselor role is, how important it is. Hopefully, school counselors have their own self care, taking care of
Oh,
themselves, their own balance.
absolutely.
Yeah, because I'm sure it really weighs heavily on their heart when they see kids struggling with things. And working virtually with students and their families, you kind of get more of an inside view of what they are dealing with. Um, yeah,
Mhm.
which could be difficult at times. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Jill Cook, for sharing your
Absolutely.
expertise. And
Thank you so much for the
thank,
conversation.
thank you.